get my 6. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid, where officially we are still off the grid. We're into day 2 now without electricity, no running water. We're on well water, but we've got an electric pump. It's hopeless. And we have company. Guys, in yesterday's video, most of you clearly saw that upright walking bipedal creature walking through these snowy woods. So watch again today, see if you see him, her, it, or they. Kind of happy I still don't have my scent and taste back yet after having successfully defeated COVID, because I'm sure that thing we saw stinks. It looked like it doesn't care about hygiene. I'm glad I didn't smell it. All right, so today's video is not about roughing it. We're enjoying it. We have an old cast iron wood stove. I very actively cut, split, stack, fully seasoned the red oak, especially my own firewood. We're loving it. It's like we're camping. The house, it dipped down into the low 20s. Right now, it's only 28 degrees. It's not so bad because the sun's out, but it's not warm enough to where any of this stuff is really starting to melt away yet unless it's in direct sunlight. We're as snug as a bunch of bugs and rugs in our house. We've been keeping that, cast iron wood stove cranked up. It's perfectly warm enough in there for us. We're cooking on the wood stove with the cast iron skillet. Our bellies are full. We are blessed. We had enough water and everything, of course. We're not preppers. Those people will make me nervous, but we certainly are prepared. So that's where we are. I wanted to give you that update. My wife and I seem to be fully and completely over the virus. No side effects or symptoms whatsoever right now. Life is good. Life is beyond good. Life is fantabulous. And I know that's not a word. Our life is so great I had to come up with the word. So it's fantabulous. Now, what I'm going to talk to you about today is something that we all know. We all know this. So you're going to be like, why are you even talking to us about this crazy lake? Everybody knows this. Well, what is this great thing that everybody knows? Well, everybody knows that, the minute you graduate from college, sorry about that. I know it's grossing some of you out. I just forget to bring hankies with me. I'll use my eyeglasses case, okay? Might stink. I don't know. I can't smell it. So anyway, everybody knows that the minute you walk across that stage when you graduate college and they hand you your diploma, especially if it's a well-known college, like an Ivy League school like Harvard or even, the Harvard of the South, the University of Virginia, lots of known colleges, Alabama, Virginia Tech, okay? Definitely not a fan, but it's a well-known college. The world is supposed to roll a red carpet out in front of your feet and offer you at least $100,000 to start out, and that's the minimum, and that's your first year right out of college, and then it just goes up from there, right? And it doesn't matter what the job is. It doesn't matter what the job entails. If you've got a college degree that says you're knowledgeable in that area, you're worth $100,000. You don't have to prove anything to anybody. You don't have to actually go out there and show that you're proficient in that industry and that you know what you're doing. You should just be given $100,000 right out of the gate just to start out that way, especially if you come from a family that is generational education, generational affluence, or at least generational middle class, because that's all you've seen. That's just how it goes. That's life. Where's my $100,000, right? Degree in hand. Well, I know. You caught on. I was just joshing you, huh? That was just a joke. I'm just fooling about. That's not how the real world works. Okay, most of us know this, and here's why I'm talking to you about this for a couple of reasons. I was having a conversation this morning with someone very close to me who has a very similar background to me. Comes from Appalachia, first generation college student. We had to go out there and not just walk off stage with that diploma, but having no what's called social equity, which is like connections. I didn't know anybody who was president of a bank. I didn't graduate from a college where 5 generations worth of my family did as well, so they made it into the oil industry and had connections, and my job was waiting on me. Even after getting that degree and seeing that there was no red carpet there, I had to go out into the world, the real world, and figure out how to make it. Now, I'll admit the degree got my foot in the door, but I've never to this day worked a job where my degree was actually required as part of that job. Look at me now. I'm a YouTuber and a writer, and I didn't even major in English literature. So I was talking with someone with a very similar background, and she is often in charge of hiring in her line of work. And her line of work happens to be education. And she will often have applications put on her desk, and she will be told, this person's uncle is a superintendent of so and such county, or this person works at the state level directly under the state superintendent, and then which is a way of saying you need to hire this person because they just got out of college, they went to a very nice school, their degrees in hand. It's teaching, so it's not $100,000, it's like a lot less than that, but they're in because of their connections. And I said to this person I'm having this conversation with, and I know in her background, which is just like mine, I'm like, what do you do? She goes, I thoroughly look at that application and I thoroughly consider that person for employment. But I'm sorry, if I have 20 or 30 other applicants, and some of these folks actually have experience in the classroom, and some of these folks have actually come highly recommended by educators and parents and former students, that's the person that gets the job, because that's the person that's most qualified. And I'm like, well, what about the person who was the nephew or the niece of the superintendent of the state who just went to UVA and blah, 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 blah? She's like, I put it in the pile with the rest of the applicants who aren't who don't get who don't get hired, and I wish the best for them. Good for her, because not everybody has the testicular fortitude to do that, but she does. Good for her. Now, I told you I was going to give you a review of this book when I finished it, by George. I'm reading George Foreman's autobiography. What an amazing man. I'm only on to chapter 4 now. I am going to give you some spoilers here because this has to do with this discussion. I'm going to tell you one more story before I tell you George's story. And I'm not telling you his whole story. I'm just telling you part of his story, okay? Because I don't know the whole story yet. I will tell you that I was wrong. George Foreman ended up, of course, going into the ministry. He doesn't cuss. Foul language is there's those words aren't part of his vocabulary, as well as a few other words. And I'm going to tell you a few other words he lists in the introduction that's not part of his vocabulary. And it's, spoiler alert, it has to do with skin color. And I'm going to explain what he means, because when I read it, I said, yeah, George, that sounds great, but I don't really get it. Well, I got it in chapter 3, and I'm going to give it to you here today, because I can relate so much with what George said. I know a guy, and I don't have anything to do with this guy, and thank God for small favors. And we often use this guy as an example for our son on how, not to be, like when we're trying to teach him about the world. If we stop for gas, he goes, can I go in and get a pack of donuts and a bottle of soda? It's like, number one, you don't eat that crap anyway. Number two, no. The average American spends $12.50 every time they stop for gas, and it's $1,200 and some dollars a year every year. It's better to have that in your mutual funds or in your savings or whatever. Little things like this that if you really, I feel, don't learn as a child, you're not going to learn as an adult, or you'll have to relearn as an adult when you're figuring out why you can't pay your bills. You're making enough money to pay your bills, but you didn't realize you're spending $260 a month at the gas station every time you stop for gas. That's just one of the things I used to tell people when I was a financial planner. They'd come into my office for an appointment, bag of Doritos in his hand and a Diet Coke in his hand. They're like, I just can't figure out how to find that extra $100 a month to throw into my mutual fund so that I can stop working when I'm old. I don't want to work forever. And I'm like, stop buying the Doritos and the soda pops, add it up. I'd make them do the math. And they're like, oh my God, there's my $100 a month. All right, now this is real world stuff. They don't teach you this in college, I know. But so I was talking to this guy. And he's the type of guy that never achieved really much of anything in the real world after college. I mean, look, numbers don't lie. If you're in your mid-50s and you've never worked and you don't work and you're mooching off of others, it's pretty safe to say you haven't really accomplished anything on your own after you have crossed the stage, degree in hand, looking for your $100,000. It never came. And clear tree knock. And that's fine if that's how you want to do. I never took offense to all of his excuses he was always making as to why he failed. It was always somebody else's fault. Hey, if that's your thing, dude, that's great. But don't tell me all the reasons why I'm successful when those reasons, in your view, have to do with luck, have to do with my viewers being stupid. That's a way of saying my videos are stupid. I was never offended by that, but I did take offense from the guy saying that The people who take their precious time to watch what I do here are stupid. The people that take their precious time to watch my videos are the reason that there is food on my family's table, and our mortgage is paid, and our bills are paid, and we're able to live the life. So I did take offense to that. So anyway, this guy was in just a particular mood that day to make sure I understood. By God, I needed to understand that I was beneath him because I was from West by God, Virginia, and I didn't grow up in affluence. And he went to UVA, and he even went as far to let me know about, that Chuck Yeager, and this is in the book The Lunatic. This book is largely based upon this guy. He's so insane. He brought up Chuck Yeager, even mentioned he met him. I don't know. The guy's a compulsive liar. Claimed to be in the Navy, even though he never served a day in the military. He was an ROTC in college, and somehow that gives him the right to claim to be a veteran. No, it doesn't. If you don't have a DD 214, you are not a veteran, period. What you've done is committed something called stolen valor. So anyway, Chuck Yeager, I'm like, yeah, being from West by God, Virginia, he's a local hero. He was a World War II hero, big American hero. And he says to me, he goes, no matter what Chuck Yeager has accomplished, he'll never be anything more than a dumb hillbilly from West Virginia. And that was supposed to be the death punch, I guess, to my ego, which I actively work to keep small because narcissism is a very ugly trait. I know I possess some of the traits, and I make sure not to possess or to push those traits on the rest of society, because as attractive as a lot of narcissists thinks that is, it's really one of the ugliest things you can do. I'm aware of it. I keep it in check. So comes at me with the gut punch. Chuck Yeager's just a dumb hillbilly from West Virginia. But I kept it in check. I said, there's no way to destroy this. I don't want to destroy this person that I'm sitting here having this conversation with, because this person has already destroyed himself. And so I simply said, well, because the thing of it was Chuck Yeager never went to college, because he had a war to fight. He had a Western Hemisphere to save. He was a little busy, okay? So anyway, I said, it's wonderful that you have those advanced degrees that you got 30 years ago that you continually throw up as one of your excuses not to work, because they're not willing to pay you enough. They're not willing to pay you what you're worth because you went to this prestigious college, you got this degree. I said, look, man, you need to understand that in the real world, none of that matters. What matters is achievement. He's like, no, they do matter. I have 2 degrees from the University of Virginia, and they matter. I'm like, yeah, when you're like in your mid-20s, it'll get your foot in the door. But once you get your foot in the door, then you've got to achieve. You've got to show that you're worthy of that, money they're paying you. The sky is limitless after that point, once you've gotten your foot in the door with that degree. But after that, you must achieve. And then he said, well, I disagree with you. I disagree with you. My degrees matter. And so anyway, okay, fine, whatever. I told him a few more things that I'm sure he didn't want to hear, but that he needed to hear. And I know this is true because he never came back. And again, I will thank God for small favors, because this man isn't welcome back here, and I think he knows that. We put up with him and his pretentious wife looking down their noses at us for about 2.5 or 3 years, making sure that, giving them their opportunities to let us know they were so much better than us because they came from affluence, generational education, and all these things. I'm a dumb hillbilly from West Virginia, and my wife, poor thing, she's my victim because the only reason she married me is because she wanted to come to America. Never came out directly and said these things, but we're constantly insinuating them and inferring them. Did it bother us? No, because we know who we are. Okay, I've fought in wars. I've lived in other countries. I've lived within other cultures, learned multiple languages, and I do have a degree. Didn't pick to be raised where I was raised, and I'm not ashamed of it. And I just chose to go somewhere else after I got out of college and do other things. It's that simple. So I have no reason to feel like a lesser than, and I don't. However, it did simply just get old. So the man never came back. And so I had confirmed to me again, talking to someone who wasn't born with a silver spoon in their mouth and hasn't lived eating from a silver spoon, the fact that achievement and opportunity, taking advantage of opportunity, is much more important than where you came from, what your family's last name is, and which university you went to. All that's great. That is what they really, I think, refer to as privilege. Some people do have it, but not everybody. Okay? So anyway, I'm going to get to George Foreman now, and I'm going to read you directly from the book how he says it. And it's only one paragraph, so be patient and hear me out. I think most people who have pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps or who have made their own way in the world kind of would agree with me, or at least kind of see where I'm coming from. I'm not always right, but I'm partially right a lot of times. So George Foreman, in his introduction, he earned my respect already, which he's already had. He says the words that are not in his vocabulary is, of course, the foul language. But then he also talks about skin color. He says throughout this book, you might find yourself wondering if some of the people I'm talking about, are they white? Are they black? Are they Hispanic? He says, I don't use those sort of terms to describe somebody, because he agrees with another one of my heroes. I just read one of his books, Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor. He was a Jewish man, was in the camp for three and a half years, lost family members in the camps, ended up becoming a leading psychiatrist the world over. But Viktor Frankl says, and George Foreman said the same thing in his introduction, quoting Viktor Frankl, Dr. Viktor Frankl. He said, there's only two kinds of people in the world, good and bad. And that's how he differentiates between people. Some are good and some are bad. And so he goes on to talk about his childhood, his upbringing. He was very poor. George grew up in the 5th Ward of Houston. It was like the poorest of the poor, inner city type situation area. There were families in his area where he was coming up who had means. There were households where there was a father and a mother. Father and mother both worked. They brought in decent money. The kids had good clothes. They had food they could take to school to eat for their lunch. Well, George didn't. George's father was gone a lot of the times. He was a heavy drinker. George's mother was a superwoman. She worked at times 2 jobs to try to provide for her children, but it still wasn't enough. George was always hungry. He was a big kid. His belly was never full. He wore the same clothes to school every day. And what he saw in his school, where, and it's in the book, and I'll get to it, George was discriminated against from an early age because of socioeconomics. Early on, he felt that teachers wrote him off as basically being a lost cause because he didn't have any money, and they would favor the other students who, like George, were black, but he doesn't use those words in his book. These are my words. They could tell that they came from families who had more, families of means. They favored them because they thought, well, these kids have a chance. George Foreman, his family, kids like him, they don't got no chance, so they didn't waste their time. George became discouraged. He quit school in junior high. Okay? Later, and he was, I would love to meet, and I've said it's my goal this year to go to Texas and meet Big George Foreman while he's still among the living, instead of waiting until he dies and talk about how much he meant to me. I want to go meet the man while he's still here. I would not have wanted to meet the 15-year-old, 16, 17-year-old George Foreman. He was mean. He would go around beat people up. He would hold people down while his friends stole the money out of their pockets. He was a bad dude. And now, I thought it was a religion that changed him, but it wasn't. Long before he even got into that, because he didn't believe in it at first. He thought religion was for poor people. He says it in his book. He says only poor people need that. They need to pray because they don't have it, and they're hoping God will give it to them or whatever. Actually, boxing, channeling his anger into his sport is what kind of that, and some people showing an interest in him and kind of taking him under their wing and letting him know you are worthy of being something. You can be more than what you're being right now. So he ended up getting in the Job Corps, which was created by LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson. It was much like the CCC camps from the Great Depression, but of course this was later. It was during the Civil Rights era, the 1960s, and it gave a lot of young men and a lot of young people, women, who needed a second chance. So George quit school in junior high, but he went off and spent a couple years in the Job Corps in both Oregon and California, and he ended up really getting into boxing when he went to California. So we're going to fast forward here. 1968 Mexico City Olympics. And this is a question I've always had. I'm like, George, you're a black man who lived through the civil rights era, all the protests, all of this, all of that, Vietnam. He was never drafted. He went down to sign up, and he was considered for some reason that he says in the book he'll never understand, less than B1A. So they never called him up. And so 1968 Olympics. The Black Panthers are trying to get a lot of all the black athletes that they could to boycott. Some of them did. A couple of them, you'll remember, a couple of sprinters did not, but then they showed protest by raising their fist after winning medals on the podium, and they were escorted, got kicked out of the Olympic place. George was in the middle of all this, and so he tells a story in his book about how some of the leadership from the Black Panthers had come to the Olympic Complex Center, watching people train, scoping out the young black athletes, trying to pick, okay, who can we use here for our movement? Who can we use here for our movement? They completely overlooked him. They didn't even speak to him, didn't even talk to him. And they of course, latched on to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to be their spokesperson for the 68 Olympics. So the question in my mind was, George, how could you live through that as a black man and not have been one of the guys that are known for the movement? Well, listen to this. I'm going to read for you exactly how he answered that question for me. And it has like everything to do with what I talked about at the beginning of this video. Take this to heart, okay? Black Panthers took Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, skipped over him, everybody else. He says, fact is, and this is, I'm quoting, this is copywritten material by Big George Foreman, okay? I think it's written in 1995. Fact is, their pitch, their being the Black Panthers, was most successful with guys like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who were used to radical messages because they attended college on campuses already hot with protests about the war in Vietnam. College is a world of youth, exuberance, and talk, not reality. Whether the students' anger was righteous, I don't know. I knew only that their world wasn't the one I saw. Maybe I was ignorant. Maybe I am a dumb hillbilly from West Virginia. But even at its most desperate and violent, the world I'd grown up in hadn't made me mad. I'd never, not for a day, felt inferior to anything or anyone. Kind of like what I just said, and I wasn't stealing George's thunder there. That's honest to God how I feel. Yes, I'd been hungry, this going back to George, but I always believed I would develop skills and earn a living for me and my family. How could I protest against the establishment when that establishment had created the Job Corps for guys like me? I'd been lifted by an airplane out of poverty into a place where for the first time I ate three hot meals a day. And I learned everything I needed to begin learning on my own. Besides, I'd experienced prejudice in a way that Harry Edwards, that's somebody who had grown up more affluent, of course, not in poverty, and his colleagues maybe had not. Remember, my family and teachers in grade school had shared my physical characteristics. You know what that means. They were black as well. But that hadn't prevented them from prejudging me and the type of man I might become. Those memories are why I've eliminated from my vocabulary adjectives that distinguish between people. Big George is a champion more than just inside the boxing ring. He gets it. He understands. Listen, folks, they'll pit us off against each other for anything they can find to get us fighting, especially for clicks and views on the internet, social media, in the mainstream media. But he's been discriminated against people that look a lot like him based upon socioeconomic status. And guys, if you don't get it, that's what it all boils down to. People who have money have a lot less problems than people who don't. Okay, yeah, they get cancer, they get sick too. There's millionaires down here in UVA hospital on the cancer wing who would give it all just to be able to come out and walk around in the snow. I know it, I get that. But Big George knows what it's like to spend a childhood being hungry because of where he came from. Listen, the real world, and I'm not trying to bash, college educated people. I'm one myself. But I guess because of where I came from and how I was brought up, I understood that degree was a foot into a door at most. Take advantage of the opportunities that are out there because they are. But no one in the world is going to roll a red carpet out in front of your feet because of who you think you are. You start going out there and making some achievements. You start doing some things. You prove your own way and even more doors will open. Thanks for spending your precious time with me today. I don't view you as stupid. I'm grateful that you're here. And I hope that you'll come back tomorrow. And if you do, I'll see you then for more. See you next time.